Some things hit you like summer rains suddenly, uninvited, impossible to ignore. You don't see them coming until you're drenched, shivering, standing still in the middle of nowhere, wondering how you missed the storm. That was me, on a sultry Friday evening, humidity clinging to my skin like a second layer, sitting on the edge of a creaky motel bed with Ian, my stepson, beside me. The air conditioner groaned with the effort of cooling the stale air, and through the small window, the last of the orange sky gave way to the deep indigo of night. Dean, my husband, had been away for work for months, to be exact, though each one had felt like a year. At first, it was bearable. We exchanged calls, texts. But over time, the silence between us grew thicker, more oppressive. Our conversations had become transactions, groceries, bills, the status of the leaky faucet, and it felt like we were strangers posing as spouses. I missed him, yes. Missed the brush of his hand on my back as we passed in the kitchen, the easy banter over late-night sitcoms, the weight of his presence beside me in bed. But more than anything, I missed feeling seen, heard, like I mattered. When Ian offered to drive me to visit my father in the countryside, a quiet stretch of hills and weathered barns tucked away from the world, I said yes, without hesitation. Maybe I thought the drive would give us time to talk. Or maybe selfishly, I just didn't want to make the trip alone. But fate had a cruel sense of humor. Halfway down a forgotten back road, the car sputtered and died, coughing its last breath like a wounded animal. We were miles from the nearest town, our phones useless, and the sun dipping fast below the tree line. We fought at first over who forgot to fill the tank, over whether it was even worth trying to flag someone down. But eventually, sweaty and frustrated, we surrendered to reality and started walking. By the time we found the motel, a crumbling relic from another decade, we were exhausted. The neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat. Only one room left, the clerk said. A single queen bed. No air conditioning, no refund. And that's how I ended up here. Sharing a bed with my teenage stepson, separated from my husband by both miles and something colder, less tangible. Regret? Loneliness? I wasn't sure. But what I did know, what kept echoing in my mind as the night closed in, was this. Some things you never see coming until they're already happening. Before I tell you what unfolded in that tiny, dimly lit room, before I peel back the layers of what we said, what we didn't say, you need to understand how the threads got tangled. Because every moment, every seemingly innocent choice, every mile traveled in silence, all of it brought us here. To this room. To this reckoning. To this unexpected detour. That morning felt unusually quiet. As the soft light filtered through my bedroom blinds, I sat at the vanity, fingers trembling slightly as I brushed foundation over the tiredness beneath my eyes. The reflection staring back at me was familiar, but distant like a photograph from another life. Yet, hidden beneath the fatigue and fine lines was still her, the woman I used to be. The one who laughed louder, who felt radiant without needing a reason, who once believed in magic. She hadn't disappeared completely. She was just in hiding, somewhere between overdue bills, unanswered messages, and too many dinners for one. I had folded her away like an old letter kept safe, but unread. But this morning something stirred. A flicker. A small defiance against the monotony. As if she whispered, "I'm still here." Downstairs, Ian was lounging on the couch, halfway through a bowl of cereal. His sock feet propped on the coffee table like he owned the place. His tousled hair and mischievous grin were the exact brand of chaos I wasn't prepared for, but had grown to tolerate. "You ready to hit the road, Miss J?" he called out, spoon midair. I narrowed my eyes, half annoyed, half amused. "Don't call me that." "Sorry, Miss Jennifer," he smirked, stretching the syllables dramatically. "But seriously, if I drive, you promise not to yell when I scratch your dad's prehistoric dinosaur?" "I'll think about it," I shot back, grabbing my bag. "But if you dent it again, you're explaining it to him." He laughed, the sound light and unbothered, like wind chimes on a summer porch. There was something about him, his recklessness, his boyish charm, that felt oddly comforting. It reminded me of what warmth once felt like. What attention without expectation used to be. I shook off the thought. It was just a drive. Just two people on an errand. Nothing more. We didn't even make it for 2 hours. Suddenly, a loud hiss, like the final breath of something giving up. Then silence. Ian cursed softly and coasted the Buick to the shoulder of a dusty two-lane road flanked by empty fields and the endless sky. The engine ticked as it cooled, an exhausted sigh after too much time and too many miles. "Well, that's new," Ian muttered, popping the hood with a frown. I was already clutching my phone, holding it up like a desperate offering to the cell tower gods. No bars. Of course. We were officially stranded under a merciless sun that cast no mercy, only sweat. Great, I huffed, shoving the phone back into my bag. Stranded, middle of nowhere, in a Buick older than my career. Ian glanced at me, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Look on the bright side. We're making memories. I glared at him, but part of me wanted to laugh. Maybe it was the absurdity. Maybe it was the heat. Or maybe it was because, for once, the world had slowed down. And in this moment, amid the dust and broken machinery, that hidden version of me, the one who felt joy, who dared to hope, was beginning to stir again. The sun had long dipped beneath the edge of the highway, but the heat lingered, thick and merciless. Our car, once a vessel of hopeful momentum, had become a lifeless shell on the side of the road, its hood stubbornly up, exposing our collective failure. Calls were made, voices rose, tools clinked and were discarded one by one. Frustration mounted until it spilled into silence, a silence that grew louder with each passing minute. Eventually, we surrendered. There was no other option. The nearest town was 20 miles behind us, a decision we had smugly passed hours ago. Ian, ever resourceful, flagged down a trucker. We climbed into the cab with a few mumbled thanks, and the ride was quiet, each of us tucked in the corners of our own thoughts. The hum of the engine filled the void between us. Neither of us spoke a word. When we arrived, the motel was exactly what you'd expect from a last resort, tired, half-lit, and sagging under the weight of too many stories like ours. At the front desk, I paced, my nerves frayed and my patience evaporating with every sweat bead on my temple. Ian somehow found it in him to crack jokes with the manager, as if we weren't melting, as if we weren't tangled in this awkward mess of heat and things unspoken. Then something in me let go. I stopped thinking about Dean and what he would say. I stopped trying to force the world back into the neat little box it had exploded out of. At that moment, this disaster was real. It wasn't polished or filtered. It was just two people stranded in bad timing and raw emotion. The clerk handed us one key. Just one. The room was smaller than memory. A single bed. Its mattress slumped in the middle like it had given up. A light bulb blinked overhead, fighting for its life. The air conditioner wheezed in protest, louder than it was effective. I looked around and let out a short, bitter laugh. This is it, I muttered, more to myself than to him. Ian didn't answer at first. He just dropped his bag, kicked off his shoes, and threw himself backward onto the bed like he was claiming territory. Arms splayed, he stared at the ceiling and grinned. Welcome to paradise, Jules. One night. That's all. I wanted to roll my eyes. His sarcasm was like a mosquito in the room, impossible to ignore. And yet it was endearing. There was no mask with Ian, no carefully scripted lines. Just a messy, loud, and real. Maybe that's why it all unraveled so quickly with him. He saw me, not the version I put on for Dean, or for the world. He filled the silence Dean had left behind with laughter and lightness. And in that cramped, broken room with all its flickering bulbs and humming machines, I felt something unfamiliar and terrifying. I didn't want to leave. The heat clung to me like a second skin, thick and unrelenting. I muttered, almost to myself, "The heat's killing me," as I dragged my duffel open and reached for my towel. "I'm showering before I turn into a puddle." "Mi casa es su casa," Ian replied from the other side of the room, his voice slow and sleepy, half lost to exhaustion. His eyes were barely open, but his words carried that same familiar warmth I was starting to rely on. Go feel like royalty. Inside the bathroom, I paused. My reflection stared back at me, face flushed, strands of hair plastered to my skin. The kind of messy that comes from long drives and long silences. But beneath it all, there was something else. A shimmer in my eyes, an energy I hadn't seen in a while. I turned the knob, letting the water rush and roar until it drowned out everything else, the highway noise still ringing in my ears, the ghost of Dean's face lingering at the edge of memory.
Dean.
His name flared briefly, then flickered out. The ache I expected wasn't there. Not really. Not like before. Instead, there was Ian. His laugh echoed in the hallway. His hands tossed a key card onto the dresser. The way he looked at me, not through me, not past me, but at me. Fully. When I stepped out later, wrapped in the comfort of a breezy dress I hadn't worn in months, something light, something that whispered of the girl I used to be, I found him sprawled across the bed like it was made just for him. Arms behind his head, watching some muted late-night show with the kind of casual ease that made everything feel a little less complicated. He looked up and smiled. Now that's summer fashion. I rolled my eyes out of instinct, but the smile on my face betrayed me. It didn't leave. Not through the elevator ride, not during our quiet dinner in the hotel's dim dining area, where the hum of conversation and clink of glasses faded into background music. I picked at a salad, sipped slowly from a glass of wine, but my thoughts kept wandering upstairs, to the room.
To Ian.
To how small the room felt when he was in it. Not in a suffocating way. In the way that made everything outside of it feel unnecessary. When I came back, I opened the door and froze. He was there, stretched out, still damp from his own shower. The robe clung to him loosely, carelessly. His chest rose and fell in a quiet rhythm, like he'd found peace, or maybe like he'd never lost it. The television was still on, but the images didn't matter. Nothing did in that moment, except for him. Something caught in my throat. I couldn't name it. Maybe I didn't want to. I had promised myself not to feel. Not again.
Not so soon.
But there it was, rising in my chest, burning behind my eyes. Not grief. Not guilt. Something gentler. Something terrifying. I wasn't supposed to feel anything. But I did. The night folded itself around us like an old song, one you don't remember the words to until they tumble out, one by one, from somewhere deep. The air was still, heavy with possibility. Silence didn't feel empty between us. It throbbed with all the things we hadn't said, but were slowly beginning to understand. We didn't plan for it. Maybe that's what made it real. There was a moment quiet, fragile, where our hands brushed, and neither of us pulled away. It was small, but it cracked something open. Eyes held a second longer. A laugh that didn't feel rehearsed. A lean-in so subtle it could have been a dream, until it wasn't. What started as a glance turned into gravity. The world outside faded. Time slowed. The space between us filled with 1,000 unsaid things. Then came the unexpected, overwhelming wave. That rush of feelings you can't tame once they rise. There was no dramatic confession. No perfectly timed kiss. Just the gentle surrender to something we had both, in different ways, been trying to resist. But that night, resistance gave way to realization. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. It was in the way your thumb brushed my wrist, as if memorizing a heartbeat. On the way I caught my breath, afraid that even breathing too loudly would break the spell. We weren't falling. We had already fallen. And the landing was softer than either of us thought it would be. When dawn crept in, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a secret kept by the morning sun. What we shared in those hours didn't scream for attention. It whispered the truth. A kind of truth you only recognize when you stop trying to control the story. If you're wondering what happened when the sun rose, what we said, what it changed, you'll have to wait. Because that story deserves its own moment. But I can tell you this much. Some rides start with maps and careful plans. Ours? It began with a detour. And sometimes, the detour is the most unforgettable part of the journey. There's no going back now. And honestly, I wouldn't want to.